A child's love is supposed to be the purest thing in the world, a simple, unbreakable bond. That's what I believed until the day I sat in a cold, sterile courtroom and watched my daughter-in-law tell a judge that my grandson's love for me was a lie. She called him a puppet and called me a monster, all to hide a truth so dark it had already cost me my son. They say the truth will set you free, but in my experience, the truth is a demolition ball. My name is Arthur Peterson, and this is the story of how I lost my son, fought for my grandson, and uncovered a betrayal that burned a family to the ground. The silence is the worst part. That's what nobody tells you about grief. It's not the crying, not the hollow ache in your chest, or the phantom feeling of an arm around your shoulder that's no longer there. It's the silence. The house my son, Thomas, built with his own two hands. A house that once echoed with his laughter and the thunderous footsteps of my grandson, Leo, was now a museum of what used to be. Every room held a ghost. Thomas was my only child, a builder, a dreamer, a man with hands as calloused as mine, but a heart far gentler. He married his high school sweetheart, Sarah. She was vibrant, ambitious. When they first got together, her energy was a whirlwind that swept Thomas off his feet. I saw how she looked at him, and I thought it was adoration. Looking back now, with the clarity that only devastation can provide, I realize it was the look of someone who had just found a key to a door they'd always wanted to open. They gave me Leo, my grandson. From the moment he was born, that boy was my second chance. He had Thomas's mischievous eyes and my stubborn chin. While Thomas was working, I was the one who taught Leo how to tie his shoes, how to properly hold a hammer, how to cast a fishing line into Miller's Creek without getting it tangled in the reeds. We had a bond forged in sawdust, motor oil, and whispered stories about the stars. The day I lost Thomas is seared into my memory like a brand. A foggy morning, a slick road, a truck that swerved. The call came from a state trooper with a voice full of practiced, empty sympathy. My world, which had been a sturdy, well-built structure, collapsed into a pile of splintered timber and dust. In the immediate aftermath, we clung to each other. Sarah's grief was loud, performative. She was the tragic widow draped in black, accepting casseroles and condolences with a trembling hand pressed to her lips. I didn't question it. Grief wears 1,000 different masks. Mine was silent. I retreated to my workshop, the scent of cedar and pine a balm on my raw nerves. I focused on Leo. He was 8 years old and his world had been obliterated. He didn't cry in front of his mother. He'd wait until he came to my house, climb onto my lap in the old armchair, and just let the tears fall silently, soaking the front of my flannel shirt. "Does Dad know I miss him?" He'd whisper into my chest. "He knows, buddy," I'd say, my voice thick. "He knows, and he's watching over you, always." The first crack appeared about 2 months after the funeral. It was a Saturday. I'd promised to take Leo to the lake, to the spot where Thomas had caught his first big bass. Sarah called me that morning. "Arthur, I don't think that's a good idea," she said, her voice strained. "It'll just, bring up bad memories for him." "Or good ones," I countered gently. "It's important to remember, Sarah. It's how we keep him with us." There was a pause. "Well, I'm his mother and I've decided against it. We're going shopping for a new couch. The old one is just saturated with him." Saturated with him. The words hit me like a slap. That couch was where Thomas had read Leo bedtime stories, where they'd built pillow forts, where he'd fallen asleep watching old westerns with me. To her, it was just a piece of furniture that needed replacing. It was the first time I felt a cold knot of dread tighten in my stomach. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Over the next few months, the cracks widened into chasms. Sarah started going out more. "Grief support group," she'd say, but she'd come home smelling of wine and expensive perfume. Her eyes bright with a feverish energy that had nothing to do with mourning. She hired a team to declutter the house. This decluttering involved boxing up most of Thomas's belongings, his books, his awards, his favorite worn-out sweatshirt, and shipping them to a storage unit. Leo was her biggest inconvenience. His quiet sadness was a cloud on her newly sunny horizon. When he'd try to talk about his dad, she'd change the subject. Let's not dwell on the past, sweetie. Daddy wouldn't want us to be sad. He started spending more and more time with me. My small house became his sanctuary. We'd work on projects in the garage, fixing an old lawnmower engine or building a birdhouse. In those moments, I could see my son in him so clearly, the way he'd bite his lower lip when he was concentrating, the frustrated sigh when a screw wouldn't catch. It was both beautiful and agonizing. The breaking point came 6 months after Thomas's death. I arrived to pick up Leo for the weekend and found a man in the kitchen. He was tall, dressed in a slick suit, laughing with Sarah as he leaned against the counter Thomas had installed. His name was Mark. Leo was sitting on the stairs, his face pale, clutching the little wooden car I'd helped him build. He looked like a refugee in his own home. Mark glanced at him and then at me, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "So you're the famous grandpa," he said, his tone condescending. Sarah rushed over, her cheeks flushed. "Arthur, this is Mark. He's a friend. He's helping me with some of Thomas's financial affairs." Financial affairs. I knew a lie when I heard one. I looked from her, to Mark, and then to my grandson on the stairs. The picture was sickeningly clear. She wasn't just moving on, she was erasing. She was paving over the life she'd built with my son as quickly as she could. I knelt in front of Leo. "You ready to go, champ?" He nodded, not taking his eyes off Mark. He scrambled down the stairs and practically threw himself into my arms, burying his face in my coat. As I carried him out to my old pickup truck, I heard Sarah laugh behind us, a bright, tinkling sound that made my blood run cold. It wasn't the sound of a grieving widow. It was the sound of a woman who had just been set free. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't just about grief anymore. This was a war for my grandson's heart, and I had no idea how dirty the fight was about to get. The days with Leo were my lifeline. In him, I saw the legacy of my son, a continuation of all that was good and decent. And I saw a little boy drowning, desperately trying to keep his head above the waves of his mother's indifference. Mark became a permanent fixture in the house Thomas built. The new couch arrived, a sterile, gray monstrosity that looked like it belonged in a hotel lobby. The family photos on the mantelpiece were gradually replaced with abstract art. Sarah's wardrobe changed. The modest, comfortable clothes she used to wear were swapped for designer labels and high heels that clicked with sharp authority on the hardwood floors. My time with Leo became more precious and also more fraught with tension. Sarah started imposing rules. "He needs to be back by 7 on Saturday, Arthur. He has a play date with Mark's daughter." Or, "Don't feed him junk food. We're gluten-free now." It was never about Leo's well-being. It was about control. It was about severing the ties to his old life, to me, to Thomas. Leo started having nightmares. He'd wake up screaming, his little body drenched in sweat. Sarah's solution was to put him in his own room at the far end of the house and give him melatonin gummies. My solution was to sit with him, to hold his hand and talk him down from the ledge of his fear until his breathing evened out and he drifted back to a more peaceful sleep. One Tuesday evening, Sarah called me in a panic. "You have to come get him, Arthur. He's out of control." I drove the 15 minutes to her house with my heart pounding against my ribs. I found Leo locked in his room, sobbing. Sarah and Mark were in the living room, sipping wine. "He had a complete meltdown," Sarah said, waving a dismissive hand. "He found one of Thomas's old work shirts in a donation bag and just lost it. He accused me of trying to throw his dad away." Mark smirked. "Kid's got issues. Needs a firm hand." I ignored him, my eyes locked on Sarah. "Where is the shirt now?" "In the trash, where it belongs. It was old and stained." I felt a rage so pure and hot it nearly blinded me. I walked past them, went to Leo's door, and knocked gently. "Leo, it's Grandpa. Can you let me in?" The lock clicked, and the door opened a crack. His face was blotchy and swollen, his eyes red-rimmed. He threw himself into my arms. "She's throwing him away, Grandpa. She's throwing Daddy away." I held him tight, my own grief a fresh, open wound. "No, she's not. We won't let her. You and me, we're the keepers of the memories, okay? We hold on to him." I took him back to my place that night. Sarah didn't object. She seemed relieved. We sat in my workshop, the smell of sawdust a familiar comfort. We didn't talk much. I just let him be close, let him feel the steady presence of someone who was grieving the same man he was. A few weeks later, the final straw broke. It was the anniversary of Leo's 4th birthday, a day Thomas had made legendary by building a full-size pirate ship in the backyard out of cardboard and old lumber. Leo woke up that morning, and the first thing he said was, "Remember the pirate ship, Grandpa?" I smiled. How could I forget? Captain Leo and First Mate Daddy. He was quiet for a moment. Mom doesn't remember. I asked her. She said, "Oh, was that the year we had that party?" He looked up at me, his 8-year-old face etched with a pain no child should ever know. She doesn't remember him. Later that day, when I dropped him back at his house, we found Sarah and Mark in the backyard with a landscape designer. They were pointing at the old oak tree in the corner, the one that held the tire swing Thomas had hung for Leo. "And a water feature here, I think," the designer was saying. "We'll have to take out that old oak, of course. It's blocking the sun." Leo's hand tightened in mine. "No," he said, his voice small but clear. "You can't. That's my dad's tree." Sarah turned, an annoyed expression on her face. "Leo, don't be dramatic. It's just a tree. We're making the yard more beautiful." "It's already beautiful," Leo shouted, his voice cracking. "Dad built the swing. We carved our initials in it. You can't." Mark stepped forward. "Hey, watch your tone with your mother, kid." That's when it happened. Leo looked from Mark's smug face to his mother's cold one, and then he looked at me. His entire body was trembling, a mixture of fear, rage, and heartbreak. He took a step back from his mother toward me, and the words came out in a desperate, ragged whisper that tore through my soul. "I don't want to live with you anymore," he said to Sarah. "I want to live with Grandpa." The silence that followed was deafening. The landscape designer suddenly became very interested in a patch of dirt. Mark's smirk vanished. Sarah's face, for the first time, lost its mask of bored detachment and contorted into something ugly and furious. "Don't be ridiculous, Leo," she snapped. "You don't know what you're saying." "Yes, I do," he insisted, his voice gaining strength as he took another step toward me, putting my body between himself and his mother. "I want to live with Grandpa. He remembers Dad. He loves me." Sarah's eyes, cold and sharp as chips of ice, fixed on me. The look she gave me wasn't one of a heartbroken mother. It was the look of a queen whose subject had just committed treason. "You did this," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "You've been poisoning him against me." "Sarah, that's not true. The boy is hurting," I said, placing a protective hand on Leo's shoulder. "Oh, I'll show you what hurting is," she replied. She pulled out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. "You want him? Fine. You can talk to my lawyer." The war had been declared. The battlefield was my grandson's future, and the first shot had just been fired directly at my heart. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that this woman would burn the world down before she would ever let me win. The letter arrived a week later. It was thick, creamy parchment, the kind of paper designed to intimidate. The letterhead read, "Donahue, Finch and Associates, a law firm known for its high-priced, merciless litigators." The contents were a formal petition for a restraining order, citing my destabilizing influence on my grandson and accusing me of parental alienation. It was a declaration of total war. My hands trembled as I read the words. Lies, all of them. Twisting my love for Leo into something sinister. It claimed I bribed him with gifts, that I badmouthed Sarah, that I was manipulating a grieving child for my own selfish reasons. It was Sarah's voice, filtered through the venomous legalese of her lawyer. I felt a surge of helpless fury, followed by a wave of cold fear. She had money, Thomas's life insurance, his savings. I was a retired carpenter living on a pension and Social Security. How could I possibly fight a powerhouse firm like that? But then I looked at a framed photo on my mantelpiece. It was of me, Thomas, and a 5-year-old Leo, all three of us covered in mud and grinning from ear to ear after a fishing trip. I looked into my son's eyes in that photograph, and I knew I couldn't back down. I would sell my house, I would drain my savings, I would do whatever it took. I wouldn't lose the last piece of Thomas I had left. Finding a lawyer who would take my case on a limited budget was a challenge. Most of them gave me a sympathetic look and the number for a family counseling service. Finally, a friend from my old union recommended a woman named Eleanor Davies. She wasn't from a fancy downtown firm. Her office was a small, cluttered space above a bakery, and it smelled faintly of yeast and coffee. Ms. Davies was in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through you. She had a no-nonsense air about her that I immediately trusted. I laid out the whole story, my voice cracking more than once. She listened patiently, taking notes on a yellow legal pad, never interrupting. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, tapping her pen against her chin. "So she's painting you as a manipulative old man trying to steal her son?" "I'm just trying to keep my grandson safe and happy," I said, my voice hoarse. "He's miserable there. He chose to come with me." "And she's saying he didn't," Ms. Davies clarified. "She's claiming you put the words in his mouth. In a custody battle, Arthur, a child's preference is considered, but it's not the deciding factor, especially when one parent alleges manipulation. A judge might see an 8-year-old as impressionable." "So what do we do?" I asked, the hope that had been kindled in me starting to flicker. "We fight back," she said, a steely glint in her eyes. "We don't just defend, we attack. Why does she want to keep him so desperately if she's emotionally neglecting him? It doesn't add up. Women like this, there's always another motive. Usually it's money." Her words echoed the unease I'd felt for months. "Thomas had a significant life insurance policy," I admitted, "and his construction business was doing very well." "And she's the sole beneficiary, I assume?" "Yes, but there's a trust for Leo, for his education and future. Thomas was very specific about that." "Who's the trustee?" she asked, her pen starting to move again. "Sarah is, until Leo turns 25. Ms. Davies stopped writing and looked up at me. A slow, knowing smile spread across her face. "Well, well, well," she said softly. "There it is." The next few weeks were a blur of legal maneuvering. Sarah cut off all my contact with Leo. My calls went unanswered. When I drove by the house, the curtains were drawn. The silence was a physical torment. I'd wake up in the middle of the night thinking I heard him call for me, my heart pounding in the empty house. Ms. Davies filed a counter-petition for temporary custody, citing emotional neglect and an unstable home environment due to the new man, Mark, moving in so quickly. We compiled evidence. My journal entries detailing Leo's distress, sworn affidavits from neighbors who had witnessed Sarah's frequent late-night parties, a statement from Leo's school guidance counselor noting his marked decline in mood and grades since his father's death. Sarah's legal team retaliated with a ferocity that stunned me. They painted Mark not as a new boyfriend, but as a stabilizing male figure in Leo's life. They portrayed my fishing trips and workshop projects as dangerous and unsupervised activities. They twisted my quiet grief into depression and emotional instability, making me out to be an unfit guardian. Every legal document was a dagger, each accusation a fresh wound. Sarah was not just trying to win, she was trying to annihilate me, to erase my role in Leo's life, just as she was erasing Thomas's memory. The court set a date for a preliminary custody hearing. The judge would hear from both sides and decide on a temporary arrangement, while a more thorough investigation and psychological evaluations were conducted. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my workshop holding the last thing Leo and I had built together, a small, wobbly bookshelf for his room. He'd been so proud of it. He'd signed his name on the bottom in marker. Leo Peterson, Builder. I ran my thumb over his name. He was my son's son. He had Peterson blood in his veins, the blood of builders, of men who fixed what was broken, and his little world was broken into a million pieces. I had to be strong for him. I had to face that courtroom, face Sarah and her lies, and be the man my grandson believed me to be. I had to be his foundation when the world was shaking beneath his feet. I just prayed to God that the judge would look past the expensive lawyers and the polished lies and see the simple truth. A little boy just wanted his grandpa. The courtroom felt like a freezer. The air was sterile, the light was a harsh fluorescent glare, and the dark wood of the benches and the judge's dais seemed to absorb all the warmth in the room. I sat beside Miss Davies, my hands clasped so tightly my knuckles were white. Across the aisle sat Sarah, looking serene and elegant in a navy blue dress, a picture of bereaved motherhood. Mark was seated directly behind her, his hand resting proprietarily on her shoulder. The sight of it made my stomach churn. The judge was a woman named Maria Santos. She had a stern, tired face and looked at all of us over her reading glasses as if we were a particularly tedious puzzle she had to solve before lunch. Sarah's lawyer, Mr. Finch, went first. He was a silver-haired shark in a $1,000 suit. He spoke in smooth, reasonable tones, painting a picture of a devoted, grieving mother trying to create a new normal for her traumatized son. He described me as a well-meaning but overbearing and grief-stricken grandfather who was confusing his own needs with the child's. Mr. Peterson, Finch said, his voice dripping with false sympathy, is projecting his own loss onto young Leo. He is in effect trying to turn his grandson into a replacement for his deceased son, Thomas. It is a classic, though tragic, case of emotional transference. Ms. Davies was on her feet. Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is psychoanalyzing my client without a license. Sustained, Judge Santos said, her voice flat. Stick to the facts, Mr. Finch. But the damage was done. The seed of doubt had been planted. When it was my turn to speak, my heart hammered against my ribs. Ms. Davies led me through my testimony. I spoke about my bond with Thomas and then with Leo. I described Leo's nightmares, his sadness, his withdrawal at home. I told them about the incident with the tire swing and the moment Leo whispered that he wanted to live with me. It was not my idea, Your Honor, I said, my voice thick with emotion as I looked directly at the judge. It was his. A child knows where he feels safe. He knows where he is loved. My grandson doesn't feel safe with his mother anymore. Then came the cross-examination. Mr. Finch circled me like a predator. Mr. Peterson, isn't it true you've been openly critical of Mrs. Peterson's new relationship with Mr. Mark Jennings? I have been critical of a man moving into my son's home less than 6 months after his death, yes. So you admit you've spoken negatively about his mother's choices in front of the child? I have never spoken ill of Sarah to Leo. I spoke about what was appropriate. A distinction you made, not the child. Isn't it true you buy Leo expensive gifts? A new bicycle? A video game console? Things his mother has asked you not to? His old bike was too small. I got him a new one for his birthday. It wasn't about money. But it does seem convenient, doesn't it? That after receiving these gifts, the child suddenly decides he wants to live with the source of those gifts? He was twisting everything, making my love look like bribery, my concern look like manipulation. I felt my composure slipping, my anger rising. I could see Sarah watching me, a faint, triumphant smirk on her lips. Finally, Sarah took the stand. She was brilliant. She cried at all the right moments, her voice trembling as she spoke of her love for her son, her devastation over losing her husband. She portrayed herself as a victim, a woman struggling to hold her family together against the interference of a controlling father-in-law. All I want is for Leo to be happy, she said, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. But Arthur, he keeps dragging him back into the past. He fills his head with stories, makes him feel guilty for trying to be a normal little boy again. He's confusing him. Then Ms. Davies began her cross-examination. She was calm, methodical. Mrs. Peterson, you state that Mr. Peterson is a destabilizing influence. Can you give us a specific example of how his presence has harmed Leo? He encourages Leo's morbid fixation on his father's death. So you believe remembering his deceased father is morbid? No, of course not, Sarah backtracked, flustered. But there's a healthy way to grieve and an unhealthy way. And a new boyfriend, a new couch, and selling off your late husband's personal effects 6 months after his passing is the healthy way? Ms. Davies asked, her voice dangerously soft. Objection, Finch shouted. I'll rephrase, Ms. Davies said smoothly. She walked closer to the witness stand. Mrs. Peterson, your son Leo, stated in front of multiple witnesses that he wanted to live with his grandfather. Is that correct? Sarah's composure cracked for a second. Her eyes flashed with anger. He's a child. He was throwing a tantrum. Arthur had just bought him a very expensive toy. So he didn't mean it? No, he didn't. He was just saying it to be difficult? Yes. Then Ms. Davies paused, letting the silence hang in the air, before she delivered the killing blow to my heart. So when your 8-year-old son expressed a clear desire, born of his own grief and fear, you're telling this court that he was lying. Sarah looked directly at the judge. Her face was a mask of sorrowful sincerity. And then she said the words that shattered what was left of my world. Yes, she said, her voice catching in a convincing sob. He was. I'm his mother. I know him. He didn't mean it. Mr. Peterson coached him. He put those words, that awful lie, into my son's mouth. A lie. She called her own son a liar in a court of law. She invalidated his pain, his voice, his choice, all to win. The room spun. All the air was sucked from my lungs. I looked at this woman who had once been family, who had shared holiday meals at my table, and I saw a stranger. A monster. Judge Santos sighed, looking from Sarah's tear-streaked face to my stunned one. This is a highly contentious situation, the judge said, her voice weary. It is clear that the child is at the center of a significant amount of adult conflict. The final decision was a crushing blow. I am not prepared to remove the child from his mother's care at this time. However, the allegations are serious enough to warrant further investigation. I am ordering a full psychological evaluation for the child, Leo Peterson, and for both parties, Mrs. Peterson and Mr. Peterson. I am also appointing a guardian ad litem to represent the child's best interests. In the interim, Mr. Peterson's visitation will be restricted to 4 hours, twice a month, and must be professionally supervised. We will reconvene in 90 days when the reports are complete. Supervised visitation, like I was a criminal, like I was a danger to my own grandson. I felt Ms. Davies' hand on my arm, but I barely registered it. As the court adjourned, Sarah walked past me, led by Mark. She didn't look at me, but I saw the flicker of victory in her eyes. She had won. She had taken my grandson and used his own voice against him, against me. I walked out of that courthouse feeling older and more broken than I had the day my son died. She had told the judge it was a lie, and the judge for now had believed her. I had 90 days. 90 days to uncover a truth strong enough to overcome the most powerful lie of all. The 90 days felt like a prison sentence. My 2 supervised visits with Leo each month were a form of exquisite torture. They took place in a sterile room at a family services center, filled with worn-out toys and smelling of disinfectant. A quiet, sad-eyed woman named Carol sat in the corner, taking notes. Leo was a ghost of his former self. He was quiet, subdued. He wouldn't meet my eye for long. The easy, joyful chatter we once shared was gone, replaced by short, careful answers. I could see the confusion and fear in his eyes. His mother had told him one thing, his heart another, and the adults with clipboards were watching his every move. Is it because of me? He asked during our second visit, his voice a tiny whisper as he pushed a toy car back and forth. Is everyone mad because of what I said? I knelt in front of him, ignoring the supervisor. No, buddy, never. You did nothing wrong. You told the truth, and telling the truth is the bravest thing a person can do. The grown-ups are just confused, but I am fighting for you. I will never, ever stop fighting for you. He finally looked at me, and in his eyes I saw a flicker of the old Leo, a flicker of hope. That was enough to fuel me. Between visits, I met with Ms. Davies. We were at a dead end. Our character witnesses were being dismissed as biased. My psychological evaluation came back as expected for a grieving father and grandfather. Sarah's was, according to her lawyer, glowing. She's playing the part perfectly, Arthur, Ms. Davies said, frustration etched on her face. The grieving widow, the protective mother. We're attacking her character, and it's making us look vindictive. We need something else. We need something concrete, something that proves her motive isn't Leo's well-being. The money, I said, for the 10th time. It's always been about the money. But we can't prove it, she countered. Controlling Leo's trust as his guardian is her right as his mother. It doesn't look suspicious on its own. We need to find something that shows Thomas knew she was untrustworthy. A will, a letter, an email, anything. We had been through all of Thomas's papers from the house, the ones I had managed to secure before Sarah boxed everything up. There was nothing, just business receipts, blueprints, and old tax returns. Defeated, I went home and did the only thing that brought me any comfort. I went to my workshop. I started cleaning, trying to bring order to the chaos of my thoughts. I was sorting through an old toolbox of mine, one Thomas had often borrowed, when my fingers brushed against a small false bottom I had built into it decades ago to hide spare cash. I'd forgotten all about it. Curious, I pried it open. There was no cash. Instead, there was a single, small brass key. It was a safe deposit box key. It wasn't from my bank. I didn't recognize the logo, a stylized eagle with the letters FNB, First National Bank. My heart started to pound. Thomas knew about this false bottom. He was the only one. Why would he put a key in here? The next morning, I was at Ms. Davies' office before she had even finished her first cup of coffee. I placed the key on her desk. Her eyes lit up. This could be it, she breathed. Getting into that box was a legal nightmare. We didn't have a court order, and I wasn't the owner. It took Ms. Davies 2 weeks of relentless legal wrangling, arguing that as the executor of Thomas's estate, a role Sarah had conveniently forgotten to inform me of, I had a right to see if any estate documents were in the box. Finally, a judge, tired of the paperwork, reluctantly signed a limited order, allowing me one-time access in the presence of a bank officer and a court clerk. The bank was cold and silent, like a mausoleum for money. I signed a dozen forms, my hands shaking slightly. The bank manager, a stern woman with her hair in a tight bun, used her key, and then I used mine. The lock clicked open. She pulled out a long metal box and placed it on a table in a private viewing room. The court clerk stood by the door looking bored. My breath caught in my throat. What if it was nothing? What if it was just old stock certificates or something equally useless? I lifted the lid. Inside there were 2 things. The first was a large manila envelope. The second was a slim, black leather journal. My hands went to the journal first. I opened it. The first page was in my son's familiar, blocky handwriting. October 12th, 7 months before his death. I think Sarah's having an affair. I can't prove it yet, but I'm not a fool. The late-night work meetings, the way she hides her phone, the receipts I found for hotel rooms in the city, hotels she had no reason to be in. She's been seeing a man named Mark Jennings, a financial advisor she met at a conference. She thinks I don't know. She thinks I'm just a simple builder, too busy and too stupid to see what's right in front of my face. I had to stop reading, my vision blurring with tears. I wasn't crying for the betrayal. I was crying for my son, for the pain he had been hiding, for the loneliness he must have felt. He had known. All this time he had known. I forced myself to keep reading. Page after page detailed his heartbreak and his growing resolve. He chronicled her spending, her lies, her increasing distance from both him and Leo. He was building a case for divorce. He wanted full custody of Leo. She doesn't love him, he wrote. She sees him as an accessory, another part of the perfect life she's constructed. If we split, she'll fight for him, not out of love, but out of spite. And for the money. I have to protect my boy. My son's words were a voice from the grave, a testament to the truth I had felt in my bones all along. Then I opened the manila envelope. Inside were copies of financial statements, phone records she'd forgotten to shred, and printouts of emails. And one other document. It was a rider, an addendum to his life insurance policy. I read it, and my blood ran cold. Thomas, my smart, careful son, had met with his insurance agent a month before he died. The rider he'd added was specific. It stated that in the event of his death, if it could be proven that his spouse, Sarah Peterson, was engaged in an adulterous relationship at the time of death, or had been within the preceding 12 months, the primary beneficiary designation would be voided. The entire sum would be paid directly into the indefeasible trust for his son, Leo Thomas Peterson, to be managed not by the surviving parent, but by a court-appointed third-party trustee. My son had laid a trap, a posthumous checkmate. He had known she was a threat, and he had taken steps to protect his child, even from beyond the grave. The car accident had just happened before he could pull the trigger on the divorce. Sarah wasn't just fighting for custody of Leo to control his trust. She was fighting to prevent the truth of her affair from ever coming out. Because if it did, she would lose everything. The multi-million-dollar payout she was living on would be clawed back by the insurance company. She'd be destitute. Worse, she could be charged with insurance fraud for failing to disclose the material change in her marital circumstances when she filed the claim. I closed the journal, my hands steady now. The grief was still there, a heavy cloak on my shoulders, but now it was mingled with a cold, hard resolve. This was no longer just about custody. This was about justice. This was about honoring my son's last wish. "Ms. Davies," I said, turning to her, my voice low and clear, "I think we have what we need." She was already on her phone, a predator's smile on her face. "Get me Judge Santos's clerk," she said into the phone. "We need an emergency hearing, and tell them to issue a subpoena for a Mr. Mark Jennings." The war wasn't over, but we had just found our atomic bomb. The emergency hearing was convened 2 days later. The atmosphere in the courtroom was electric with tension. Mr. Finch, Sarah's lawyer, was visibly agitated, arguing fiercely that this was a procedural ambush. But Judge Santos, her curiosity piqued by Ms. Davies's cryptic filing, overruled him. "I have reviewed the submitted documents in my chambers," the judge said, her eyes boring into Sarah. "I find them compelling. Let's proceed." Sarah looked confused but not yet scared. She probably assumed we'd found some minor financial discrepancy. Mark, who was also present under subpoena, looked arrogant and bored, as if this was all a massive inconvenience. Ms. Davies didn't call me to the stand. She didn't call any of our old witnesses. She called her first and only witness, Sarah Peterson. Sarah walked to the stand, her confidence wavering slightly. Mr. Finch gave her a reassuring nod. Ms. Davies let her get comfortable. "Mrs. Peterson, we're here today because of new evidence pertaining to the welfare of your son, Leo. I'm sure whatever my father-in-law has fabricated now is as baseless as his previous claims," Sarah said coolly. "This evidence wasn't fabricated by my client, Mrs. Peterson. It was written by your late husband." A flicker of alarm in Sarah's eyes. "What are you talking about?" Ms. Davies held up the black leather journal. "Do you recognize this, Mrs. Peterson?" Sarah squinted. "No, I've never seen it before." "This is your husband's private journal, discovered in a safe deposit box he opened without your knowledge. In it, he details his discovery of your affair with Mr. Mark Jennings, which began over a year before his death." The color drained from Sarah's face. Mr. Finch was on his feet. "Objection! Hearsay! Lack of foundation! My client is being ambushed with unverified documents." "Your Honor," Ms. Davies said calmly, "the journal entries are corroborated. We have subpoenaed financial records showing repeated hotel and restaurant charges by Mrs. Peterson with Mr. Jennings, phone records showing hundreds of hours of calls between them, and emails. The foundation is rock solid." Judge Santos leaned forward, her expression grim. "Objection overruled. Answer the question, Mrs. Peterson. Were you having an affair with Mr. Jennings before your husband's death?" Sarah looked from the judge to Ms. Davies to her own panicking lawyer. She looked at Mark, whose smug expression had been replaced with one of pure shock. He was realizing, perhaps for the first time, that he was tied to a sinking ship. "That's a ridiculous accusation," Sarah stammered. He was grieving the loss of his mother. He was paranoid. He wasn't himself." "So he imagined it all?" Ms. Davies pressed. "He imagined the hotel receipt from the Fairmont on September 5th? He imagined the $2,000 charge at Tiffany's you couldn't account for? A gift from Mr. Jennings, perhaps? He imagined the hundreds of text messages you exchanged every week?" For every denial, Ms. Davies had a document, a date, a number. She dismantled Sarah's lies with the precision of a surgeon. Sarah's composure crumbled, replaced by a shrewish, defensive anger. "We were friends. Mark was supporting me. Thomas was neglectful, obsessed with his work." "So neglectful," Ms. Davies said, her voice dropping, "that he took out a multi-million-dollar life insurance policy to ensure you and his son would be cared for if anything happened to him?" Sarah fell silent. It was the wrong move. Ms. Davies walked back to her table and picked up another document. "Your Honor, this is a rider to that policy, signed by Thomas Peterson 1 month before his death. It contains a specific infidelity clause. It states that if Mrs. Peterson was found to be in an adulterous relationship, her claim as beneficiary would be void, and the full payout would be redirected into Leo's trust, managed by a neutral third party. The entire courtroom was silent. Mr. Finch looked like he'd been punched in the gut. Sarah's face was a mask of disbelief and horror. The trap had been sprung. "This has nothing to do with custody," Finch finally managed to yell. "It has everything to do with custody, Your Honor," Ms. Davies thundered, her voice ringing with conviction. "Mrs. Peterson's entire fight for her son has been a lie. She didn't want him because she loved him. She wanted him because he was her meal ticket. She emotionally neglected this child, tried to erase his father's memory, and then lied in a court of law, calling her own son a liar, all to protect her fraudulent insurance claim. This isn't about the child's best interests. It's about greed, deceit, and a level of moral bankruptcy that is breathtaking. She is not fit to be a mother. My client's son knew it, and he left us a roadmap to the truth." Judge Santos stared at Sarah, her face carved from stone. "Mrs. Peterson, did you disclose your relationship with Mr. Jennings to the insurance company when you filed your claim?" Sarah's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She was cornered, exposed, stripped of all her lies. The judge looked at the insurance writer, then at the journal, then back at the terrified woman on the stand. "I think I've heard enough." The unraveling was swift and brutal. Karma, I've found, isn't a gentle corrective force. It's a tidal wave. The judge immediately reversed her previous order. I was granted sole legal and physical custody of Leo, effective immediately. Sarah's visitation rights were suspended, pending a criminal investigation into insurance fraud. The court seized her assets, frozen from the fraudulent claim. Mark Jennings, seeing the money and the lifestyle disappear, was gone by the time Sarah got back to the house. He wanted no part of the scandal or the financial ruin. He abandoned her as quickly and callously as she had abandoned the memory of my son. The insurance company, armed with our evidence, filed a civil suit to claw back every penny. The district attorney's office opened their fraud investigation. Sarah went from a mansion and a new lover to a cheap rental and a team of lawyers she could no longer afford. She had lost her husband, her lover, her money, and now her son. She had grasped for everything and was left with nothing. Her perfect world had been a house of cards built on a foundation of lies, and my son, from his grave, had finally blown it all down. The court officer escorted me to a small, quiet room where the guardian ad litem was waiting with Leo. He had been kept away from the proceedings, shielded from the ugly truths that had been unearthed. When he saw me, his face lit up with a pure, unadulterated joy that felt like sunshine after a long winter. "Grandpa!" He ran and launched himself into my arms. I held him tight, burying my face in his hair, breathing in the simple, honest scent of a little boy. The weight of the last year, the fear, the anger, the crushing loneliness, it all seemed to dissolve in that embrace. "Is it over?" he whispered into my shoulder. "It's over, buddy," I said, my own voice thick with unshed tears. "We're going home." There was no triumphant departure. I simply took my grandson by the hand, and we walked out of the courthouse, leaving the wreckage of Sarah's life behind us. We didn't look back. The first few weeks were an adjustment. Leo was quiet, processing the seismic shift in his universe. We didn't talk about his mother, not at first. We focused on creating a new routine, a new normal. We made pancakes for breakfast. I helped him with his homework at the kitchen table. We went for walks by the creek and worked on projects in the garage. Slowly, painstakingly, I helped him rebuild the sense of safety and stability that had been stolen from him. One evening, about a month later, we were sitting on the back porch, watching the fireflies begin to dot the twilight. "Is Mom in trouble?" he asked, his voice small. I chose my words carefully. "Yes, Leo, she is. She made some very bad choices, and now she has to face the consequences for them." "Because she lied?" "Yes," I said. "Mostly because she lied." He was silent for a long time, watching the blinking lights. "She told me I was lying, about wanting to live with you." "I know she did, but you and I knew the truth, and now everyone else does too. Your dad knew too. He was always looking out for you, Leo, even now." He seemed to accept that. He leaned his head against my arm, and we sat in comfortable silence as the stars came out. The gaping wound of Thomas's absence was still there. It would always be there. but we were learning how to live around it. We had each other. We had the memories, the good ones, and we were the keepers of them. Life found a new rhythm. The house was no longer silent. It was filled with the sounds of Leo's video games, his laughter, the noise of our tools in the workshop. The ghosts were still there, but they were gentle now. They were memories of Thomas that we could smile about, not just cry over. We hung his picture back on the wall. We talked about him every day. We kept him alive in our stories, in our hearts. Sarah ended up taking a plea deal. She avoided prison time but was left with a mountain of debt and a criminal record. She was a ghost in our lives now, a cautionary tale about greed and deceit. The court-ordered therapy helped Leo process his complicated feelings about her, the love for the mother she once was, and the pain of who she became. This morning we went fishing at Miller's Creek, at the same spot where I taught Thomas and where he taught Leo. The sun was warm on our faces, and the water was calm. Leo, now 9.5, cast his line with a practiced flick of his wrist. "You know, Grandpa," he said, his eyes fixed on the bobber, "I think Dad would have liked today." I looked at my grandson, this brave, resilient boy who had been through so much. I saw my son's eyes, my stubborn chin, and a strength that was all his own. He was the best part of all of us. He was our legacy. "Yeah, buddy," I said, a smile touching my lips for what felt like the first time in an eternity. "I think he would have, too." The silence we shared wasn't the empty, aching silence of grief anymore. It was the peaceful, contented silence of two fishermen, a grandfather and his grandson, healing together under the vast open sky. And it was enough. Thank you for letting me share my story with you. It's a story about loss and betrayal, but I hope more than that, it's a story about the enduring power of family and the fight for truth. The past year has taught me that a person's true character isn't revealed in the good times, but in how they navigate the darkness. My son Thomas was a builder, and even in death, he built a path to protect his son. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in fighting for the ones you love no matter the odds, please take a moment to hit that like button and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Your support means the world. And if you'd like to hear more stories about justice, family, and the unexpected turns of life, please consider subscribing to the channel. Thank you for listening.